People are always asking what power tools they should buy first, and almost every time the question is the same. Do I really need this tool? I understand the frustration behind it, because power tools are expensive, and there are way too many options. Most people don't want a collection, they just want to get things done without wasting money. The problem is, a lot of the tools people start with feel useful, but don't actually help them build much of anything. So, in this video, I'm going to clear that up. First, I'll show you 3 power tools people keep buying that they should stop buying. Then, I'll show you the only 2 power tools most people actually need. And at the end, I'll show you how to know which power tools are worth buying from now on. Stop buying this first. The jigsaw. The jigsaw is one of the most common first power tools people buy, and it's usually sold as the safest, most versatile way to start cutting wood. It looks approachable, it's small, and it's often described as a tool that can do a little bit of everything. For someone new to power tools, that promise is hard to ignore. The problem is that the jigsaw is badly mismatched to the kinds of cuts most people actually make when they're starting out. Beginners aren't cutting curves and artistic shapes, they're cutting shelves, plywood panels, deck boards, studs, and straight trim. And this is exactly where the jigsaw struggles the most. A jigsaw blade is thin and only rigidly supported near the top. As soon as you push it through thicker wood, the blade can flex and wander, especially on longer cuts. That's why so many first-time users complain that their cuts aren't straight. Edges look chewed up, or the blade seems to drift even when the shoe is square and the line is marked carefully. This isn't user error as much as it is a limitation of the tool itself. You can upgrade blades, slow down, clamp guides, and practice technique, and the results will improve a bit. But even experienced users will tell you that a jigsaw is not the tool you reach for when accuracy and clean lines matter. It's a specialty saw, not a foundation saw. What usually happens next is predictable. The jigsaw makes projects harder than expected. Boards get wasted. Cuts need fixing. Progress feels slow. And instead of realizing the tool choice was the issue, people assume they're missing skill or patience. That's a frustrating place to be early on, and it's one of the reasons so many DIY projects stall out. A jigsaw absolutely has a place later, once you already own a stronger, more accurate cutting tool and you need curves or interior cutouts. But as a first or primary saw, it creates more problems than it solves. And the worst part is that it delays the purchase of the tool that would have made everything easier from the start. That delay leads straight into the next mistake people make. After struggling to get clean cuts, they don't usually fix the cutting problem. Instead, they try to fix how the project looks. That's when the sander enters the picture. Stop buying this too early. The random orbital sander. The random orbital sander is often the next tool people buy after they've struggled through a few rough cuts. It feels like a responsible upgrade. Sanding looks like craftsmanship. It looks like the step that turns rough work into something finished. And because sanding is slow and methodical, it gives the impression that it's correcting mistakes instead of just hiding them. The issue is that sanding doesn't build anything. It only changes how something feels after it's already been built. If your cuts are off, your joints don't line up, or your boards aren't square, sanding can't fix that. At best, it softens the evidence. At worst, it rounds edges, changes dimensions, and creates fit problems that weren't there before. For beginners, the random orbital sander often becomes a crutch. Instead of learning how to cut accurately and assemble cleanly, they end up sanding aggressively to make things good enough. That usually leads to thin edges, uneven surfaces, and projects that look tired instead of intentional. This is one of the most common patterns you see in early DIY work. Too much sanding used to compensate for weak cutting. There's also a time cost that doesn't get talked about enough. Sanding eats hours without visibly advancing a project. For someone learning, that can drain motivation fast. You spend an entire afternoon covered in dust, only to realize the piece still doesn't fit or still isn't square. At that point, the sander hasn't saved time or money, it's just extended the frustration. None of this means a random orbital sander is a bad tool. It's a great tool when it's used at the right time. The problem is buying it before you have the tools and skills to produce clean cuts and tight assemblies. Finished tools belong after structure tools. If you reverse that order, you end up polishing mistakes instead of preventing them. And just like with the jigsaw, this leads people toward the next wrong purchase. When sanding doesn't fix poor joins or weak assemblies, the instinct is to look for a tool that locks things together faster. That's when many people reach for the next mistake. Stop buying this. Electric staple guns. Electric staple guns are one of those tools that people buy because they seem like a shortcut. They're marketed as fast, clean, and beginner-friendly. You see them advertised for upholstery, paneling, light woodworking, and quick fixes around the house. For someone new to tools, they look like an easy way to fasten things without learning much technique. That promise is exactly why so many people end up disappointed. The first problem shows up almost immediately: inconsistency. Electric staple guns struggle as soon as the material changes even slightly. Soft pine might accept staples fine, but plywood edges, hardwoods, or denser boards cause staples to sit proud, drive crooked, or not penetrate fully. That forces you to hammer staples in by hand or pull them out, which defeats the entire purpose of buying a powered tool in the first place. Jamming is another constant complaint. Budget electric staple guns, in particular, are notorious for misfeeds. Staples bend inside the nose, get stuck halfway out, or fail to advance cleanly. When that happens, work stops completely. You're clearing jams, reopening the tool, and resetting it over and over. For a tool that's supposed to save time, this gets old very fast. The deeper issue, though, isn't just reliability, it's misuse. Many people buy electric staple guns thinking they can replace real fasteners. They try to use them to attach panels, hold trim, secure shelving backs, or even assemble light structures. Staples simply aren't designed for that. They don't clamp material together the way screws do, and they don't offer the same long-term holding power. Over time, joints loosen, panels shift, and things start to feel flimsy. Because the tool fires instantly, it also removes feedback. You pull the trigger and the staple is driven, whether the piece was aligned properly or not. There's no chance to test fit, back out, or adjust. For beginners, that speed actually works against learning. Mistakes happen quickly, and correcting them usually damages the material. Another reason electric staple guns disappoint is how limited their useful range really is. They work best in very specific situations: thin materials, soft substrates, and non-structural tasks. That's a narrow slice of what most people imagine doing when they buy one. As a result, the tool gets used once or twice, then pushed to the back of a shelf. None of this means electric staple guns are useless. In upholstery, fabric work, insulation, or temporary tacking, they can be helpful. The problem is buying one early and expecting it to carry real projects. It doesn't replace proper fastening, and it doesn't help you learn how things go together. This is another example of a tool that feels productive without actually moving a project forward. It fires fast, but it doesn't build confidence or capability. And when it fails, people often assume they need more tools, when what they really need is a better foundation. That foundation starts with cutting material accurately. Once you can do that reliably, everything else becomes simpler, which is exactly why the next tool earns its place so quickly. The first tool that actually makes projects easier: the circular saw. Once you step back and look at where most early projects fall apart, the pattern is obvious. Materials aren't the problem. Plans aren't the problem. The problem is that people can't break stock down accurately. Boards are slightly long, slightly short, or just not square. And when that happens, everything downstream suffers. This is where the circular saw changes the entire experience of building. A circular saw is designed around straight, controlled cuts. The blade is thicker and more rigid than what you'll find on a jigsaw, and it's supported by a solid base plate that keeps the tool stable as it moves through material. That stability is what allows it to track a line instead of drifting away from it. For anyone who has struggled to get clean edges with smaller saws, this feels like an immediate upgrade in control. The value of the circular saw isn't just accuracy, it's versatility in real conditions. With a simple straight edge or guide, it can handle long crosscuts that people assume require a miter saw. It can rip plywood and sheet goods in a way that most homeowners don't have the space or budget to do with a table saw. Instead of bringing material to a stationary tool, you bring the tool to the material, which is far more practical when you're working in a driveway, garage, or backyard. This portability matters more than it seems at first. Large stationary saws demand setup, clearance, and storage space. A circular saw doesn't. It lives on a shelf, comes out when you need it, and goes back just as easily. That low friction means it actually gets used, and tools that get used are the ones that build skill. There's also a misconception that circular saws are somehow limited or rough tools. In reality, modern circular saws deliver a surprising amount of power in a compact form. Many models are capable of handling framing lumber, hardwoods, pressure-treated stock, and even tougher materials with the right blade. That range means the tool doesn't become obsolete as your projects get more ambitious. Another overlooked benefit is consistency. When you use a circular saw correctly, the cut you make today looks like the cut you made last week. That repeatability is crucial. It allows you to focus on layout, joinery, and assembly instead of constantly compensating for tool behavior. Over time, that consistency is what separates frustrating projects from satisfying ones. Just as important is how the tool changes your mindset. When cutting stops feeling like a risk, you start planning better projects. You stop designing around tool limitations and start designing around what you actually want to build. That shift alone is worth more than any accessory or add-on tool. If this way of thinking about tools is useful to you, this is a good moment to support the channel. Liking the video helps it reach people who are in the same position you might be in. And subscribing means you'll catch future videos that focus on making smarter decisions instead of buying more stuff. Once you have a reliable way to cut material to size, the next bottleneck appears immediately. You need a way to fasten those pieces together that gives you control, flexibility, and room to learn. That's where the second tool earns its place. The second tool that makes everything come together, the 18V, 20V cordless drill. Once cutting stops being the weak point, fastening becomes the next place where projects either come together cleanly or start falling apart. This is where the cordless drill earns its reputation as one of the most useful tools you can own, not because it's flashy, but because it gives you control. An 18-volt or 20-volt cordless drill with a clutch does two critical jobs in one body. With drill bits, it lets you bore clean, accurate holes through wood, plywood, and composites. With driving bits, it lets you install fasteners in a controlled way that pulls joints together instead of tearing them apart. That combination matters far more than raw power. The clutch is the feature that changes everything. Instead of spinning endlessly, the drill disengages once a set torque is reached. That means screws seat properly without stripping, heads don't get buried below the surface unless you want them to, and delicate materials don't split as easily. For someone learning, that feedback loop is invaluable. The tool teaches you what right feels like. Cordless drills also allow for a more deliberate workflow. You can pre-drill, test fit, back a fastener out, and adjust alignment before committing. That flexibility is something nail guns and single-purpose fastening tools don't offer. When you're still developing instincts for spacing, alignment, and structure, being able to slow down is a strength, not a weakness. Battery power plays a bigger role than most people expect. Not having to manage a cord makes the drill easier to move, easier to store, and easier to grab for small tasks. It fits naturally into a tool belt, moves around a project without snagging, and encourages use instead of avoidance. Over time, that convenience translates directly into more finished work. Voltage matters here as well. An 18-volt or 20-volt platform gives you enough headroom to handle real jobs. Drilling with spade bits, boring holes for hardware, or driving larger structural screws. Lower voltage drills can work, but they bog down under heavier loads, which adds frustration and limits what you can take on. A properly sized drill grows with you instead of holding you back. Another important advantage is compatibility. Most cordless drill platforms support a wide range of accessories and attachments, which means the tool evolves as your needs change. You're not locked into one task or one style of work. You're building around a flexible foundation. Once you combine a reliable way to cut material with a controlled way to fasten it, something important happens. Projects stop feeling like a fight. You're no longer compensating for tools that are too weak, too aggressive, or too specialized. Instead, you're working within a simple system that supports learning and experimentation. At this point, a pattern becomes clear. With just these two tools, a surprising number of projects suddenly become realistic. And that leads to the bigger realization most people never hear early on. Why these two tools cover most projects. People actually do. Once you've used both of these tools for a short time, something becomes obvious that most beginners never get told directly. Nearly every project you attempt follows the same basic pattern. You take raw material, you cut it to the size you need, and then you fasten it together or fasten it in place. No matter how complex a project looks on the outside, those two actions are happening over and over again. That's why these two tools punch so far above their weight. The circular saw handles the cutting side of the equation in a way that scales. It works for small repairs and for large breakdowns of material. It adapts to different spaces and different materials without demanding a permanent setup. You can use it for framing, decking, shelving, trim work, and even basic furniture projects. The more you learn, the more capable the tool becomes, without needing to be replaced. The cordless drill does the same thing on the fastening side. It allows you to attach, detach, adjust, and refine as you go. That flexibility is critical when you're building in real environments where walls aren't square, lumber isn't perfect, and plans change mid-project. Screws give you forgiveness, and the drill gives you control over how that forgiveness is applied. Together, these tools form a complete loop. You cut something, you test it, you fasten it, and if it's not right, you correct it. That loop is how skills develop. Tools that skip steps or force commitment too early interrupt that process. Tools that support it accelerate learning. This is also why so many other tools feel redundant once you understand the workflow. A miter saw is excellent at one type of cut, but it doesn't expand what you can build. It just speeds up repetition. A nail gun is fast, but it removes the ability to adjust. A sander makes things look smoother, but it doesn't fix structure. None of these tools are bad, but they don't unlock new categories of projects on their own. What actually unlocks projects is the ability to size material accurately and assemble it reliably. Once you have that, you can work on fences, decks, storage units, wall repairs, and countless household tasks with confidence. The limitation stops being your tools and starts being your imagination or your time. This is the part most people miss. They assume they need more tools to build more things. In reality, they need fewer tools that do more of the right work. And once you internalize that idea, your buying habits change permanently. That naturally leads to the next question people ask. If these two tools handle so much, when does it actually make sense to add more? When it actually makes sense to add more tools. This is where a lot of people go wrong, not because they buy bad tools, but because they buy them too early. Once someone owns a few projects worth of experience, the urge to upgrade kicks in. They start noticing tools in videos, on job sites, or in stores, and assume those tools are the reason the work looks easier or cleaner. What's usually missing is context. Additional tools only make sense when they remove a specific, repeated bottleneck. Not when they look useful, not when they promise speed, and not when they solve a problem you haven't actually hit yet. If a tool doesn't remove friction from something you are already doing over and over, it's probably a distraction. For example, a miter saw makes sense when you're doing repeated crosscuts. To the same length and accuracy matters for speed, not just correctness. A table saw earns its place when you're ripping sheet goods or dimensioning lumber frequently enough that setup time pays off. A nail gun becomes useful when you understand fastening well enough to commit without adjustment. These tools are about efficiency, not capability. That distinction matters. Efficiency tools speed up work you already know how to do. They don't teach you how to do it. If you introduce them too early, they don't just fail to help, they can hide weak fundamentals. You end up faster at making mistakes instead of better at building. Another sign that a tool is premature is when you're buying it just in case. Tools bought for hypothetical projects tend to sit unused. Tools bought to solve a current problem tend to get worn in quickly. That difference shows up in every well-used shop. The most valuable tools look beat up. The least useful ones still look new. There's also a financial angle that doesn't get discussed enough. Every additional tool pulls budget away from materials, and materials are where learning really happens. Cutting, assembling, and fixing mistakes teaches far more than owning another piece of equipment. If a new tool means you can't afford to build the project you actually want to build, it's the wrong purchase. Once you stop chasing tools and start responding to needs, the whole process becomes calmer. You're no longer reacting to marketing or social pressure. You're responding to your own work. And that puts you in a position to make good decisions long term, not just on this one video. Which brings us to the final piece. How to make those decisions confidently, no matter what tool you're looking at. How to know the right power tools to buy every time. There's a simple rule that cuts through almost all tool buying confusion. Never buy a power tool unless it replaces a repeated problem you already have. Not a future problem, not a theoretical upgrade, a real, frustrating, I keep running into this problem. If you're constantly struggling to cut material accurately, you don't need a collection of saws, you need a better cutting solution. If fastening feels unpredictable or messy, you don't need speed, you need control. Tools should answer questions your projects are already asking. Another reliable signal is frequency. Ask yourself how often you would reach for the tool in a normal month. If the answer is maybe once or twice, that tool doesn't belong in your early setup. Borrow it, rent it, or work around it. Ownership makes sense when repetition makes setup worthwhile. It also helps to separate capability from convenience. Capability tools expand what you can build. Convenience tools make existing work faster or cleaner. Early on, prioritize capability. Speed and polish can wait. A slow, correct project teaches more than a fast, sloppy one. Finally, pay attention to frustration. Real frustration is information. When you find yourself thinking, there has to be a better way to do this, that's when a tool deserves your attention. Until then, the best thing you can buy is experience. If you build around that mindset, you won't end up with a shelf full of tools you barely use. You'll end up with a small group of tools that feel familiar, reliable, and earned. And that's what actually leads to better projects, not bigger collections. At that point, you're no longer guessing in the tool aisle. You're deciding with confidence. And that's the whole point. If you take anything from this video, let it be this. You don't need more tools to do better work. You need the right ones at the right time. Once you stop buying tools out of habit or hype, projects get simpler, cheaper, and a lot more enjoyable. If this breakdown helped you think more clearly about what's worth buying and what isn't, go ahead and like the video. It helps more people find it. And if you want more content like this, focused on practical decisions instead of tool collecting, subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in the next one.